Hello, good people of YouTube. Mountbatten here. And today, well, before we get into today's video, I just want to thank you guys for the positive feedback and reactions to yesterday's video. That video was obviously a lot more involved. We went a lot more, well, editing crazy, if you will, in that video than I normally do. But when I do have time to do those videos that take, a couple of weeks to do, I do like to do those. It's just, again, finding the time for them. So again, thank you guys for that. If you haven't seen yesterday's video, I highly recommend you check it out. It's a tier list for battleships in the same vein as my ultimate strategy tier list that I made about a year ago. So if you enjoyed that strategy tier list video, make sure you check out yesterday's video. It is, as if I may say so myself, S tier. Anyway, getting on into today's video, I figure since we are in the first week of 2023, we'd go ahead and take a look at what is coming in 2023, what we know is going to be releasing, and then I'm going to go through some of my predictions for the year when I think certain things that we have heard about but haven't been given solid dates on are going to come out, and also what changes are going to come to the game and what that could potentially mean for the game as well. So, let's go over what we know. So, where's this information coming from? Well, this is coming from the previous roadmap article that the devs put out. The devs started doing these roadmap articles and streams after the CC fiasco as part of their endeavor to increase communication and just kind of keep us more up to date with what's going on in the game and what's coming out. I greatly appreciate it. Again, it gives us a good idea of what to expect in the next couple of months. Now, the last roadmap they did was fall 2022, so that covered most of October, November, December, but they did give us a little bit of what was going to happen in 2023. So we do know that, of course, the first new class of the year is going to be the IJN light cruisers. They've been in early access already for the past couple of patches, and with the January patch, which should be, I think it's going to be like middle of January, late January, the IJN light cruisers will be coming out in full. I already got my first impression review up for the tier 8, and we'll see what the tier 9 and tier 10 are like. They do seem right now to be made of explodium, but again, we'll see what happens with the 9 and the 10. Now, the first truly new line of 2023 will be the American hybrid battleships. They are entering early access with, again, the same patch that is releasing the IJN light cruisers. So they're the first on, full bore 2023 class that hasn't been out in the previous year. And these guys are, well, the hybrids are going to be something. From what I've seen, again, I'm not a CC, I'm not a super tester, I haven't had my hands on these things, but I have seen them in games, and their strike squadrons do seem to be quite powerful, and the Louisiana does have this very weird set of guns. She has 10 16-inch guns. She has a quad turret on the rear. My state's name has been forever tarnished by the existence of this thing, but we do know those are coming out. They early access in the next patch, so they should be out in full in 2 more patch cycles. So that should be early March, mid-March, late February, depending upon how the patches drop. So 10 weeks from the next patch, those guys should be out and about. Now, we do also know that Pan-American cruisers and European DDs should be coming out if we follow the general guidelines of when stuff gets announced and when it gets released. That's typically about 4 months. However, the Pan-American cruisers, they do seem to be having a bit of an issue trying to find their identity. If you guys didn't know, a couple of dev blogs ago, they announced that the Pan-American cruisers are they're completely changing how they work. So, yeah, that could be signs of some developmental troubles. But after the American hybrid battleships, it should be either the Pan-American cruisers or the European destroyers. And of course, after whichever one of those comes out first, the other one should follow. Now, that's what we know is going to happen in 2023 so far. We know for sure that those 3 lines are coming out in 2023. We don't know much beyond that. Again, of course, unless something crazy happens with the Pan-American cruisers and they get stuck in dev hell for most of 2023. Wouldn't be the first time something like that's happened with a ship. I mean, that happened with Sevastopol. I don't know how long it was between the announcement of that ship and that ship being released. I think it was almost like a year and a half or something like that. So let's talk about predictions now. What could happen in 2023? So starting with something that's not really a could it happen, but more of this is when it could happen. So the Idaho, which is the Iowa-class battleship with the Des Moines guns, I'm predicting that that's going to be coming out for the 4th of July. Now, like I just said, the normal time frame from announcement to release is normally about 4 months. That's, again, typically what happens. But with how weird the Idaho is, considering it's a battleship with heavy cruiser guns and not like 305mm guns like we have on the Mecklenburg, but, you know, small 8-inch guns, very small guns for a battleship, I'm predicting that ship's going to go through quite a bit of changes in testing, and it might get stuck in a bit longer of a development cycle, but I do think that is going to be the 4th of July ship this year. Wargaming typically likes to release ships that coincide with, of course, national holidays. That was the whole reason why we got the Yukon. They wanted to have a ship out in time for Canada Day. They didn't have time to model a completely new ship, so they had to take an asset that they already had, which was the Monarch, and just tweak it a little bit to get the Yukon. So I think that's what's going on here at the Idaho. They just announced it a little bit ahead of time, probably start to build up hype for it, and I think it's going to come out sometime around July 4th. It may not be exactly on July 4th, but I'm betting that's the window that they're aiming for. Now, after that, I am predicting that the next tech line is going to be British submarines. They were announced a little bit before the Idaho, and they're submarines, so there's still a lot of things that are probably going to be changing with submarines, although they did say that since submarines have been released, they aren't touching them for some time. So I'm thinking maybe late summer, early fall. That's when the British submarines are going to come out. Again, they've been released for some time. Well, they've been announced for some time. Their information and their stats have been known to us for some time now, so I'm thinking that's when they're going to come out. Then after the British submarines come out, whichever one of the Pan-American cruisers or the European DDs, whichever tech line that doesn't get pushed out first, that's when I'm going to predict that next tech line is going to come out. So like if the Pan-American cruisers do wind up coming out first, then after the British submarines get released, I believe the European DDs are going to be released as well. And then after the European DDs, I think we're probably going to wind up getting something like Japanese submarines. There's been a couple of rumors here and there, and they've been mentioned once or twice that they're working on them, and that the Japanese submarines are going to be more of the cruiser class of submarines, like they've mentioned with the I-56, where they aren't really traditional submarines. They play like the I-56. They play more like small destroyers than submarines. They don't really have the best homing torpedoes. They have dummy guided torpedoes. They're big targets. They have deck guns that you, the player, can control. And overall, I think the cruiser submarine formula does work better than the current submarine formula. They're a lot less annoying to play against. You don't have to deal with the incessant pinging from submarines, and they're large targets, and they're quite slow. And it would make sense, the Japanese submarines during the war, they were made for operating in the Pacific. That's a big ocean, of course. They had to be larger to have the endurance and have the sustainability to operate in the Pacific. Now, with this amount of submarines being released, I do also think we're going to start to see just an absolute floodgate get opened, and we're just going to start to see just waves and waves and waves of premium submarines. I mean, we already have the I-400, and then the Soviet one, which I can't think of right now. It's like, what, S-186, S-185, something like that. We're going to start to see more of those. I won't be surprised that if the Japanese submarines come out and we don't get the I-400, I will be very surprised. I think we are going to get that monstrosity in the game when the Japanese submarines do come out. Now, keep in mind, too, the Soviet submarines have been announced and are probably coming out in 2023 as well, but I would put that as later in the year. So we're going to start to see a ton of submarines in this year now that the lines have officially been released and the class is officially in the game. Now, unfortunately, this also means that we're going to be seeing a lot of the other new class that Wargaming has been forcing upon us, and that is super ships. They've been releasing 2 super ships at about the rate of, what is it, like I think it's at least every 3rd patch now. It feels like we're getting another 2 super ships, if not every other patch. They have said that they would like every class, well, not every class, every tech tree in the game to eventually have a super ship at the end of their tech line, and they are making very good strides in that direction. Again, like 2 every other or every 3rd patch, it seems, at this point. Now, this of course leads us to the question of, well, how is this going to affect the game? These are 2 classes that, if at least from what you read here on YouTube and on the forums and on Reddit, they don't seem to be that popular with a large part of the player base. Now, it's truly impossible to really measure how large that is, because at least from the ones that get on YouTube, get on Reddit, get on the forums, they don't seem to be that popular. But there's a very good chunk of this player base that doesn't get on Reddit, doesn't get on YouTube, doesn't get on the forums. As with most video games, that's just how it works. At least from those guys, the more hardcore players that are more involved in the game, you know, they watch YouTubers, they watch streams, they don't seem to be that popular. But for the average Joe, we really don't have a way to gauge that. And that's one thing that Wargaming brings up when they talk about submarines, saying that, yes, you know, it's a vocal opposition to submarines, but they say it's a vocal minority. So we don't really have a way to gauge that. And that's going to be one big thing that is going to affect this game this year, because they're coming out in full. And as we just talked about here, they have 3 whole lines of these submarines that are in the works right now. The British, the IJN, and the Soviet submarines. They're in the work, with probably more on the way. Now, that doesn't mean that these lines aren't going to be, you know, rushed out the door as soon as possible. Again, they could get delayed. The Soviet ones, again, they've been making some pretty big changes to those as well. So they could be delayed by a couple of years, but I'll be surprised if we get less than 3 submarine branches this year in the game. So that, in turn, how's that going to affect the player numbers? Well, that's hard to say, because for the last about year and a half, and we've discussed this before in the player count video, submarines have been out and about. At least on the North American server, there hasn't really been any major loss of player numbers. It's been staying roughly the same. If you look at the server count for North America, you will see a big spike, of course, when COVID happened and everyone was forced to stay home. And then we did come down from that spike, and it doesn't really seem like the player base really retained much players from that big spike, and it went to about normal. And it's been frighteningly consistent ever since then, and it probably will be. The player base, again, I'm not sure what Wargaming is doing. Are they attracting enough new players to come in, play for a little while, and then by the time those guys get burnt out, some more players come in, stay for a little while, and are they just, you know, have they perfected the churn rate? I don't know. However, they've only been really having to deal with 2 lines that have mostly been in testing and have been, in some cases, limited in terms of how many players can actually get them and get into battle. But now that we're probably going to end 2023 with 5 submarine lines, could that be enough to start driving players away? I don't know. And super ships too, with more and more super ships being introduced into the game. And despite Wargaming saying that they don't intend for super ships to be a common sight, we still, I mean, how many of you guys watching right now have 3 or 4 super ship games per side, you know? Like, they don't seem to be that uncommon. Unfortunately, I wish they were. So those are the 2 biggest factors in my mind, at least going into 2023, that are going to be the ones that really decide the fate of the game. Now, it could be true. Wargaming side could be true, where it is a vocal minority that don't like super ships and submarines. Or we could be right, where we say we don't like super ships, we don't like submarines. I'm not a fan of either. I don't think either are a good fit in the game. I really don't think super ships are a good fit in the game, because it really just kind of crammed them down our throats after like one temporary event. They're like, yeah, we can put these in random battles now. It's like, what? You know, at least submarines went through like, you know, a year and a half of testing. Again, they could remove submarines tomorrow, I'd be happy. That's my 2 cents on subs. So guys, that's my predictions for 2023 in terms of the ships coming out and what are going to be the major factors in deciding how much longer this game is going to be a thing for 2023. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Hope you guys have a wonderful Friday. I will be live streaming right here on the channel tonight, on the YouTube channel and on Twitch, so make sure to come out for that. It's from about 5 p.m. U.S. Central Time to 8 p.m. U.S. Central Time, so I hope to see you there. Hope you guys have a wonderful Friday, wonderful weekend. Hope to catch you guys in the next one.